Welcome to On the Sports Lines, a show that will honor new Baseball Hall of Famer Ichiro Suzuki, giving 99.7% effort. I had this as 100%, but some jerk off decided to not vote for him, by the way, which is ridiculous. Same goddamn person probably that didn't vote for Jeter. But this show will still only give the passing 75% results afterwards. So you still lose at 24.7%. Congratulations, by the way, to the new class of the Hall of Fame, the modern portion of it, with Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner, all three Hall of Famers, New York legends. By the way, yes,
Yes.
I remember that 2012 year with Ichiro, Wagner, and Jeter. So, congrats to all three of them, and especially CC making on the first ballot. Welcome to the On the Sports Lines Conference Championship Edition. So, football. Don't worry. Baseball's in the rear premiere. We'll talk about that soon. Now, tonight we are 3 days away from the NFL Conference Championships and 3 days past the College Football National Championship. Let's talk about both, shall we? Also, let's post-mortem, or more apropos, autopsy, our pro football local seasons as well. If you're watching live on Facebook or on demand on YouTube, please comment during your viewing. That is on facebook.com/on the sports lines or youtube.com/on the sports lines. Give me positive feedback, and if you have negative feedback, direct that to Kaplan, Jay. All right, let's start with college football. Let's start with college football. Monday night in the pageantry and $3 hot dogs of Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where all that was truly hated were the SEC refs who did nothing but get booed when they were introduced for the coin toss. Shame on you people. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish and Ohio State Buckeyes had a unique national title game. Notre Dame starting with a 10-minute plus TD drive where Riley Leonard nearly collapsed after 8 carries. And then Ohio State said, F that, we're going to score 31 straight points on you. Notre Dame had a fast and furious comeback that got them to within 8. But thanks to a missed field goal, Anthony, what do you hate?
I hate kickers.
Yes, he does. Notre Dame never got a chance to drive for the tie or lead. Now, as Ohio State grabs their ninth recognized title, by the way, the fifth unanimous title, all five with different coaches, if you didn't see, as Anthony has now dropped out. We'll get back to him in a second. Big Ten gets back-to-back natties since the 40s. Hasn't happened since the 40s. So while we try to get Anthony back on, Anthony, you're back. So Anthony, I'm going to set you
I'm
up
back.
right now. You said you wanted to lead off, so you are going to lead off. Anthony, other than your hatred of kickers that you just mentioned so much that it got you logged off of this of the chat, give us your final thoughts on the national championship.
Well, my hatred for Zoom right now is starting to bubble up.
About
To
as
this.
much. About as much.
It's about a couple of weeks since this happened. My takeaway from this is I said this in our group chat. It was redemption versus validation. As far as this national championship game, and for Ryan Day in Ohio State, it was redemption. I mean, think about this. 2 months ago, we were literally watching them lose to Michigan, and pretty much Ryan Day was out the door. I mean, everything that happened with the flag planting and the hoopla behind that, and it cost Ohio State obviously a shot at playing for the Big Ten championship, and we pretty much have wrote the obituary on them. But but with the Santa College Football Playoff, they got a second life, and they didn't just make the best of it. This is probably one of the greatest 4 game stretch of games that you can find in a college football team.
Yeah.
And you gotta give credit to the players. You know, the players they rally behind their head coach. And things like that could bring a team closer together. And we saw that from the very first round game against Tennessee. I mean, they jumped out early and didn't look back. But I think the game that really I think woke everyone up to Ohio State was the Rose Bowl against Oregon. And considering the earlier matchup was very close, this game got out of control almost immediately. Ohio State jumped out to a big lead and never looked back. And you just saw the momentum building the building. And when you look at the firepower that they have and the fact that they had the top defense in the country, this is the team that we expected Ohio State to beat all season up until that Michigan game. And national championship, obviously, the dime dropped down to Jeremiah Smith to kind of put the game away. And Rabbi, I was asking you, like, would you have gone to all blitz in that situation, knowing that you was leaving a DB on an island with one of the best receivers in the nation, 1-on-1. And I even saw like you didn't jam him neither. I mean, maybe that's a good thing because if he jam and miss, that's a touchdown without question. But yeah, it's redemption for the Ohio State for Notre Dame is validation because the late comeback showed that they belong in the game. I mean, clearly they earned their way there. Um, particularly knocking off Georgia and obviously a classic against Penn State in the Orange Bowl. But um, both teams showed a knack for not giving up and not quitting. And Marcus Freeman has Notre Dame set up pretty well for next season, depending on how he recruits and everything. And the fact that he did it with really just Riley Smith, a running game, and and a cloud of dust on offense, but the defense was so good that it got them down, and they almost pulled off what would have been a remarkable comeback. But redemption at the end of the day, redemption won out, and the Ohio State Buckeyes they put to sleep all the critics as far as why they not being able to beat Michigan and losing 4 in a row to the arch nemesis. Sorry, Jay, but yeah, I mean the national championship, and by the way, they keep it in the Big Ten conference, back to back championships in the Big Ten conference. I know Rabbi, you're going to have a lot to talk about that when we get to your angle.
Well, we talked about that first time since the 40s that happened. I
Yeah.
want to get to my point about Will Howard in just a second, but I do want to talk about Notre Dame for a moment. First of all, if you get to this point, you've already belonged in the game. I think I want to establish that clearly. I mean, whatever had happened, and I think they did a very good job. That's point number one with Notre Dame. Point number two with Notre Dame, Jeremiah Love must have been injured more than we kind of know because 4 carries only in this game and even with that first drive again, Riley Leonard carried it 8 times in the first drive alone.
9.
And Jordan, was it 9? I thought it was 8 beforehand. And you get on me for correcting stuff as we go along.
Hey, those are numbers, man.
I understand that's your little guy, but just 4 yards on the ground is just not what you want out of a running game, especially with the passing game that was much better. But point number 3 is I love that opening drive that they had because I think that it showed them how they could control the game and everything, except that they kind of just took themselves out of the game seemingly for the entire half and they couldn't match it on defense. So overall, what did that drive really do for you? But the story for me is Will Howard because I think almost every national champion needs to have a quarterback that not necessarily is the best quarterback, but the quarterback that can run your offense the best. And somebody who is a championship worthy quarterback. And as far as I'm concerned, Will Howard has done it. He was offensive MVP of the national championship game. 75.5% of passes completed in the playoff. 287.5 yards and an average of 2 touchdowns per game. 8-2 interception ratio. If you look at the numbers, 311 yards, 2 touchdowns in the game against Tennessee, against Oregon. Pretty much most of his stuff in the first half is didn't need to do anything in the second half, but 17 for 26, 319 yards, 3 touchdowns. Cotton Bowl didn't have to do too much. 72% of his passes completed for 289 and 1 touchdown. And then, of course, in the national championship game, he threw for 231 and 2 touchdowns. But what impressed me the most is when you have $1 million wide receiver group, and that's what Chip Kelly brought to them, $1 million wide receiver group. You can do it in many ways possible. Hey, here, Jeremiah Smith, you do it in the first 2 games, and I'm just going to throw you dimes all through the game. 37-yard pass one game, 45-yard pass the next game. And then, of course, obviously, Jeremiah Smith, who obviously didn't do a lot until that final play, got a 57-yard pass to basically clinch the national championship. And if you can't do it with him, hey, I have other wide receivers who are part of my $1 million locker room as well. Here, Cardell Tate, you have all of these passes that all of a sudden he ended up basically getting 8 catches, and then he did the screen pass well to Travion Henderson that game. From what I saw from Will Howard, not only did I see a quarterback that is a championship quarterback in the college game, when you go through these kind of tournament situations, you become a better player entirely. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Will Howard as a good backup quarterback in the future in the NFL. I don't know if he can be a starter. I mean, with the lack of talent right now in quarterbacks, this might end up being this, but we'll see what happens as we go along. But Jay, that's what impressed me with Will Howard. I know you saw a lot in that offense going through the playoff, and especially on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna just throw in one little. To me, I can't decide what was funnier, the field goal doinkage or the sequence where Jeremiah Smith lines up solo to one side of the field, and the Notre Dame defensive back opposite him is pointing furiously at him, trying to let his teammates know we are in the wrong coverage. And instead of sticking with him, he goes along with what the coverage is and leaves the kid wide open. I'm like, come on, man, what are you doing?
That's your offense, huh?
Yeah, it just made me laugh. For anyone who thought that a national title game without any participation by the SEC would not live up to our expectations, all I have to say to the Paul Feinbaums and Lane Kiffins is, how you like me now? This matchup of two of the premier Midwest programs gave us almost everything that's possible in a single game and resulted in college football's national championship trophy staying in the Big Ten. Yeah, you alluded to it earlier. Yeah, we had an opening touchdown drive by Notre Dame that consumed most of the first quarter. We had Ohio State follow that by ripping off 31 straight points en route to making us think this would be another Buckeye CFP beatdown. Then Notre Dame made it a game again with a pair of second half touchdowns and 2-point conversions, only to have Ohio State crush their comeback hopes with a field goal that doinked in to seal the victory. But what really stood out to me was the way both of these quarterbacks carried their teams, doing everything they could to give their teams a chance. I'll start with Notre Dame. The opening drive, pure Riley Leonard, 18 plays, 75 yards, consumed 9 minutes, 45 seconds. The Irish converted a pair of third downs and a pair of fourth and shorts, capped by Leonard pretty much walking into the end zone from 1 yard out. He had 17 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown on the ground for the game. 9 of those carries and 34 of those rushing yards, and that touchdown happened on that opening drive. He also went 3 of 5 for 31 yards passing, so he accounted for 65 of the 75 yards and 3 of the 4 conversions on third and fourth down on that drive. And he finally did what I said he needed to do at some point this postseason. And Anthony, you alluded to it earlier. He carried this team with his arm. The Irish needed him, as the Buckeyes held Notre Dame to 53 yards rushing total on 26 carries. It's barely over 2 yards a pop. Rabbi, you talked about Jeremiah Love, who I said could not be MIA for the Irish to win. 3 yards on those 4 carries, 0.8 yards per carry. Leonard had 40 to 53 rushing yards. Channeled his inner Dookie, or his inner Will Howard, if you will, with his first 250-plus passing yard game since transferring from Durham. That last time, 291 yards versus Wake Forest back on the 26th of November, 2022. He went 23 of 31, 71% completion, 255 yards, 8.2 per attempt, 2 huge touchdown passes to make this a game again. No picks, a 161.4 passer rating. Had the Irish won, I have no doubt he would have been offensive MVP, but instead, as Rabbi said, it went to the other signal caller. Rabbi, I agree with you. Will Howard had a hell of a game leading the Buckeyes to this victory. Channeled his inner Riley Leonard, 16 carries and 57 yards rushing. 8 of those carries resulted in first downs, including 4 on third down. He started the game completing his first 13 passes against an Irish pass defense that was #1 in the nation, allowing just 50.7% completion percentage. He was 14 of 15 overall in the first half, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, completing passes to 6 different receivers. Guys, the Irish allowed 145.8 yards passing per game through the regular season. Howard practically hit that mark at halftime. I said back on our CFP title game preview show last week that the Will Howard, Jeremiah Smith pitch and catch combo had destroyed man coverage all season long. And if Notre Dame stuck with that as their primary coverage look, it would be strength on strength. And who won that battle would likely go home with the national championship. Well, 3rd and 11 from his own 34 with 2 minutes and 45 seconds left in the game. And the Buckeyes lead cut from 31-7 to 31-23. Notre Dame showed a man coverage and Howard iced the game for Ohio State, finding his pitch and catch partner for that 57-yard gain with an absolutely perfect throw, dropped it right in Smith's breadbasket. Buckeyes run the clock down to the final 26 seconds, and Jaden Fielding doinks in that 33-yarder to seal the victory. Think about this, guys. Coming out of high school, Riley Leonard and Will Howard were listed as 3-star recruits, and neither had big-time schools giving them scholarship offers. If you'd have asked me back in September who the quarterback's most likely to be in the CFP championship game, neither of these two would have topped my list. Hell, Howard would have only made the list somewhere because of all the preseason hype of the Buckeyes as most likely to win the Big Ten. Shows you guys that anything can happen in a college football season, especially in a year where 12 teams instead of 4 made the playoffs. I tip my hat to both of those guys.
And to look ahead for both teams, because obviously their quarterbacks now are out of eligibility, which I feel like is almost impossible in this day and age.
And yet.
They are this time, though. So Ohio State has their backup, Julian Sayin, is most likely going to be their quarterback. He had committed to Alabama and then decided once Nick Saban retired, he would go to Ohio State. Backed up this year, looks to be in that spot. And for Notre Dame, they are not going the transfer route. They have a guy out there in the who they picked up by the name of C.J. Carr, who is a very prized recruit. That name sound familiar, Jay?
Yeah, is he related to the quarterbacking cars of NFL fame?
Nope, it's Lloyd Carr's
Michigan head coach, Lloyd Carr. Okay.
Yep, that's why I asked you. So just keep that in mind going forward, and also Jeremiah Smith.
I have a feeling Bryce Underwood kept him from following in his father's footsteps in Ann Arbor.
Not everybody wants to go to Michigan. Just letting you know. All right, as we set up pro football's ultimate game, the Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, we're going to see some familiar battles to decide the NFC and AFC championships. And you know what they say, guys, familiarity breeds contempt. Right? Start with the AFC. As the
last week.
At least. Start with the AFC, as the Bills and Chiefs are in each other's way for the 4th time in 5 years. And the Chiefs are 3-0 in those postseason matchups. But there's no way that the Buffalo Bills can lose 4 in a row in any series in the postseason. That's impossible for a team to do, right? Right?
Well, nobody's
almost
impossible like the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, well, except if it's, the Super Bowl. Anyway, all 4 winners on divisional weekend lost their yardage matchups, but the Chiefs went one further, winning while losing the yardage matchup by over 100 yards and not forcing a turnover. Being the first time that has ever happened. Teams were 0-49 in that situation in the playoffs. Yep, this is the 50th time, and this is the first time someone won it.
Wow.
So that's hell of a takeaway, Jay. Without a takeaway.
That's an impressive stat right there, partner.
Thank you. So, Jay, you can give me one hell of a takeaway from the 23-14 win last Saturday versus Houston again.
We've become accustomed to equating the Chiefs' success with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and their usually prolific offense, but they won their last Super Bowl more so because of Steve Spagnuolo's defense. His unit did have a bit of an up and down regular season. They ranked 4th in points per game allowed, 19.2, 9th in yards allowed, 5,451. That's 320.6 per game. But they were just 18th in sacks, 39, and 19th in pass rush win rate, 37%, despite defensive tackle Chris Jones being number one among all defensive tackles in pass rush win rate. And despite being fourth in blitz percentage, 31.6, fifth in pressure rate overall, 26.1, they were 18th in yards allowed after the catch, 1,987, 20th in completion percentage allowed, 65.9, 26th in third down conversion allowed, 43.3%, and yet 8th in red zone touchdown percentage allowed, 51.9. So over the course of the season, there were way too many times when opponents produced big plays and moved the football against KC's defense. And it wasn't just better quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield or Josh Allen. It was quarterbacks like Bryce Young and Aiden O'Connell having career best type of days. The Chiefs were in the middle of the pack in percentage of drives that ended with a score, 36.5, and points allowed per drive, 1.98. And then there were the struggles with fundamentals such as a lack of communication, a season-high 13 missed tackles per Pro Football Focus, 9 of 15 conversions allowed on third down at 60%, and costly penalties that hindered the Chiefs during their only loss with Mahomes on the field, and that was in Week 11 to these same Bills. So there were reasons for concern coming into the divisional round game against Houston. But man, that defensive performance, that is my takeaway here. I mean, think about this. They had help from there were a couple of guys who were key cogs in this defensive unit that did not play in that Week 11 loss to Buffalo. And that's defensive end Charles Omenihu, who had a strip sack, and cornerback Jalen Watson. Those returnees gave Spags and his defense an opportunity to play one of their best games of the season. Omenihu's return frees up Jones and allows him to get back to lining up all along the defensive line, looking for the one-on-one matchups that he can take advantage of, such as the ones that see him isolated on the outside, which putting defensive end George Karlaftis and Omenihu on the other side, making it impossible to double-team Jones. This also creates clear rushing lanes for the likes of linebacker Nick Bolton in the middle and any of the defensive backs on the outside when Spags dials up one of his blitzes to collapse a pocket and force errors by opposing quarterbacks. So with his full bag of tricks at his disposal, Spags and the defense racked up a season-high 8 sacks against the Texans, 7 of them coming in the fourth quarter. Yes, I know it's because Houston was passing on every down at that point. Along with 14 quarterback hits as the Chiefs blitzed C.J. Stroud relentlessly. 6 different defenders recorded a sack, with Karlaftis notching a career-best 3. He also had 8 of KC's 21 pressures. In the second half alone, Spagnuolo's blitzes generated 12 quarterback pressures and 3 sacks on 17 blitzes. That is a ridiculous 70.6% pressure rate. 8 of those pressures were generated by an unblocked pass rusher, according to NFL Next Gen Stats. And while KC's pass rushers gave Stroud no time to go through his progressions, their secondary blanketed his number one receiver, Nico Collins. After piling up 7 catches on 8 targets for 122 yards, over 17 yards a catch, and a touchdown in the wildcard win over the Chargers, Collins was held to just 5 catches on 8 targets for 81 yards, that is 16 plus yards a catch, but he didn't touch the end zone. Spags lined up cornerback Trent McDuffie in man coverage against Collins on 22 of the Texans wide receivers' 32 routes, that's 68.8%. And the second team All-Pro corner allowed Collins just 2 catches on 4 targets for 42 yards and an average target separation of 1 yard per NFL's Next Gen Stats. Yes, the Chiefs' defense allowed Houston to generate 336 yards of offense, including 149 on the ground at 5.1 yards per carry. That's almost 50 yards more than their regular season per game average of 101.8 yards rushing per game, and a full yard per carry more than their regular season mark of 4.1. They also allowed the Texans to hold the ball for 33 minutes and 26 seconds. Only the Bills, at 34 minutes and 3 seconds in their Week 11 win over KC, held the ball longer in a regular season games where Mahomes played. Yes, Spags' unit also allowed Houston to convert 10 of 17 chances on third down. It's 58.8%. Again, only the Bills in Week 11 converted at a better rate against the Chiefs' defense in a game where Mahomes played. All of these are cause for concern as they once again face the Bills. But if Kansas City's defensive line can harass Josh Allen in the same fashion they did CJ Stroud and can blanket Khalil Shakir the way they did Nico Collins, then they'll give playoff Pat and his partner in crime, Travis Kelce, a really good chance to get the Chiefs to their third straight Super Bowls. Guys, I haven't bet against the Chiefs all season long. I ain't going to start now.
I would never bet against the Chiefs, even though they were betting underdogs 3 times last year in the playoffs, which is insane. They were pretty close to being a betting underdog in this game. By the way, in that Week 11 game, Josh Allen rushed for 55 yards and had probably the worst defensive play of the season when the Chiefs gave up a 4th down to Allen, who went for a 22-yard touchdown and basically gave the Chiefs their only meaningful loss of 2024. Let's not count that Denver game.
We don't.
All right, Anthony. No one does. Anthony, just like Mark Andrews, let's drop all this Chiefs talk and talk about the opponents, the Bills.
What?
Sorry, Mark. I know stuff happens, but you don't deserve to be harassed for the crap you're getting this week. Not at all.
Did not. And that's coming from a guy who hates the Ravens with a passion. He didn't deserve it.
Back now are the Bills in the Final Four for the first time since 2020. The last time these two met to determine the AFC Super Bowl representative, the game ended in Bills, now gone, wide receiver Stephon Diggs, watching the Chiefs' AFC Championship trophy ceremony, adding a whole new generation of athlete look at knees. For God's sakes, there was a guy in the Fenway Park Bowl in Massachusetts who was watching UConn celebrate their trophy. I think that's not necessary for motivation this year. So thanks, Stephon. You ruined that for all of us. Anthony, what's the takeaway from the Bills' 27-25 win over the Ravens from last Sunday as we go into Josh Allen's biggest game to date?
I'm calling now, though. Someone's going to do that at the Pop-Tart Bowl one of these years. I mean,
that's a more important bowl than the Fenway Park Bowl, that's for sure.
Yeah, the agony of not being able to pick your favorite Pop-Tart to eat afterwards. I mean, that is crushing. But yeah, my takeaway from the divisional playoff of the Buffalo Bills is the defense stepping up. I mean, all season long, Josh Allen and his offense has gotten most of the attention, and rightfully so. I mean, Josh Allen's an MVP candidate for a reason. But the defense stepped up, and they stepped up in a form of forcing 3 turnovers. Found a way to slow down Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, even as Derrick Henry kind of got rolled a little bit in the second half of the game, compared to earlier this season where Derrick Henry just ran all over them for 4 quarters. But after that opening drive, Buffalo really kind of settled there defensively. I mean, they forced turnovers of back-to-back possessions. Interception by Tyler Rapp off of Lamar Jackson. By the way, this is the 6th postseason game where Lamar Jackson thrown an interception. And on the next possession, Damar Hamlin. By the way, great story with Damar Hamlin, considering what happened a couple of years ago. Strip sack fumble, Von Miller moved downfield for 39 yards. That set up the Josh Allen touchdown run. But it's the first time since Week 12 of the 2021 season that Lamar Jackson has turned the ball over twice in the first half. That is a really long stretch of football to not see the quarterback make mistakes back in the first half. But also the biggest takeaway, obviously, was Terrell Bernard punching the ball free for Mark Andrews after a catch and forcing another fumble that the Bills were able to convert into points. They held Derrick Henry to 16 carries, 84 yards, which is quite an accomplishment considering who it is. But also they blitzed Lamar Jackson on 15 of 31 dropbacks. This is for 48.4%. That's the 5th highest blitz rate in a game under Sean McDermott, and the highest in a game since Week 15 of the 2021 season, according to Next Gen Stats. The Bills are notably a zone defense, but one of the things I noticed that they played a lot more man-to-man in this game, and I think that really did help for a lot of the game. And obviously, when you look at the situation with the coming up this Sunday against Kansas City, one of the biggest differences is the Chiefs do not have a dominant power running game. So that is the one thing that does help the Bills out. They're not a physical defensive team, but they play fast. They switched to a 4-3 against Lamar Jackson, which is also another big difference. So it'll be interesting to see how they change things as far as what the Kansas City Chiefs are concerned, because while you don't have the caveat of dealing with that power running game, you still got to deal with Patrick Mahomes, still got to deal with Travis Kelce. But for whatever reason, the Texans completely forgot about the field most of the game last Saturday afternoon, and you have to deal with the creativeness of course, Andy Reid and the offense. So the Bills got their work to cut out, but that is one of the things that do give them a puncher's chance of going in to Kansas City and pulling the upset. Is the fact that they have been able to force takeaways. They were able to do that in the earlier this season against Kansas City, and the fact that this is a big confidence booster because a lot of people didn't think that they would be able to slow down Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry simultaneously, and to be able to do that and still walk away with a win on a night when I thought the Bills offense got a little more conservative than you want under the circumstances. It should be really a good chess match on Sunday.
Yeah, I completely agree. And now I'm about to throw cold water on everything, as it's time for me to talk about what will be the nail in each team's tire on the road to New Orleans. So let's see what's going to derail both teams' needs. All right. For Kansas City, on the last show, Jay Kaplan said that the Chiefs have a fully stocked wide receiver room and Travis Kelce was an X factor. Travis Kelce was not an X factor in the Kansas City Chiefs win over the Texans. He was the only factor in the Kansas City Chiefs wins over the Texans.
Hey, I did say playoff Kelce is a different animal too. So
yes, but the problem is Kelce won 17, Chiefs, everybody else 60. Xavier Worthy, Noah Gray, and Kareem Hunt were the only other people to get receptions. There are names out there like DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Hollywood Brown who didn't even get a reception in the game. Now, this team is not a very offensive team. This team is more known for the defense, and that's average, seemingly. 2.3 yards per rush through the air on each play in the game, and even with 25 attempts, Mahomes didn't even throw over 200 yards. Now, you saw Hollywood Brown. He returned late in the season from injured reserve. Xavier Worthy had some good performances in December. I think people have been waiting for him to break out all season. DeAndre Hopkins finally possibly getting a chance to win it all. And none of that really came to be in that game over the weekend. Worthy played 82% of the snaps, but only had 6 targets, 5 receptions, 45 yards. And the rest of the room, again, 75 snaps between them, 4 targets, no receptions. And all you needed was Kelce. Who else? Because that's who they depend on in the playoffs. Now, the Chiefs had a lot of lengthy possessions and overall opportunities, which is huge because I think one thing the teams don't do is plan what they want to do per game. How many actual drives that they want per game, because that seems to be a big factor in some of these games. Who has the ball last? Chiefs ran just 50 offensive plays against Houston. Just compared to the game against the Cleveland Browns that they played earlier that month, last month, they had 75 offensive plays. Now, you've seen all of them do things. In week 14, Hopkins had a touchdown. Smith-Schuster had 31 yards in that game. Hopkins had a touchdown in 15. When Hollywood Brown made his regular season debut in week 16, he reached the 45-yard mark. All I got to say is you need the wide receivers to step up. And it may work against the Texans team that was kind of shorthanded going in, but it's not going to work against the Buffalo Bills team, especially in an AFC championship, when you're going to need your team at your best. So that's what might derail the Chiefs. Now, for the Bills, I'm going to mention this before I'm going to tell you it's a bad thing. And get with me here. The Buffalo Bills have turned into one of the cleanest football teams out there this season. They almost always win the turnover battle. Buffalo on Sunday had their 12th game this season without a turnover, which is the most in any regular postseason, most in any season in NFL history when you count regular and post. And they haven't turned the ball over in 4 straight playoff games. That's never happened in NFL history. Why is this a bad thing? Because Josh Allen can't cook. The kitchen is not, the recipe is not actually there. Now, compare what he did against the Broncos, 20 of 26, 272 yards, and then also 8 rushes for 46. And then in the divisional playoff, it was kind of meh. Anthony kind of just referred to it. 16 of 22 passing for 127 yards, no touchdowns, ran the ball 10 times for 20 yards. And there were plays out there that he would have easily made. Could have done a nice little pitch to James Cook on one play, but he thought it was too risky. Didn't do it. And it's funny because when you look at the battles between these two in the regular season, between Allen and Mahomes in the regular season games, Allen kind of wins on almost every passing stat. He loses at all those passing stats in the postseason. And even though Allen has only turned the ball over once since last December, 6 total turnover dating back to this December, I'm sorry. And then in the last 19 games that he's played, including the playoffs since December, in the last 19 games, he's only turned the ball over 6 times. So he's been very confident. He's been very careful with the ball as Josh Allen and the Bills. We saw last year, I called it Brett Favre on many occasions because he played like Brett Favre, and that got them far. Now he has less people to throw to and is kind of being told to hold in the reins. But how much is too much? That's what I'm going to be looking for this Sunday. If the Bills run some of the same unimaginative stuff that they ran in that Ravens game, you're going to need a miracle like Mark Andrews dropping the ball to win that game. And I don't know if the Chiefs have a chance for Travis Kelce to drop the ball in the end zone on a 2-point conversion. I don't want my chances on that. So the Bills need to be a little more creative going into this game. And I think they could rather win a game in the 30s than rather a game in the 20s. Whew. Moving on. Now to the NFC title game, contested by NFC East rivals for the first time in 38 years. Old school NFC East, baby, with the St. Louis Cardinals in it. The Arizona Cardinals weren't even a thing yet. The Philadelphia Eagles and Washington Commanders now meet for the George Halas Trophy. They're 1-1 in the regular season. Eagles won at home in Week 11, 26-18. And then Week 16, Washington got Philly back in a crazy 36-33 game where 5 turnovers by Washington still wasn't enough for Philly to beat them. Last Sunday, Anthony, in a snow globe in Philly, the Eagles defeated the Rams 28-22 behind 205 yards from Snowquan Barkley. He legally had that changed, by the way, I heard, and rightfully so. He can do whatever he wants this year. Anthony, is that the main takeaway from last Sunday going into this Sunday, or are you looking at something different?
Well, I was going to say Quan Barkley was last Sunday. What my takeaway is definitely the lack of a passing game from Jalen Hurts. And just the numbers from the 2 playoff wins for Philadelphia Eagles this season. Excuse me. Now, rushing yards against the Packers, 169. Rushing yards against the Rams, 285, including the 205 from Saquon Barkley. Now, here's the flip side, the passing yards. Net passing yards versus the Packers, 121. Net passing yards versus the Rams, 65. Now, I understand the weather conditions against the Rams was an issue with the snow and the wind. I 100% get that. But then when you look at players like the safety that Jalen Hurts needlessly took, when he had a guy wide open and kind of flat to get the ball away, that should be a bit of a concern of your Philadelphia Eagle because you're going to be able to watch the Commanders team that just playing with house money, and then Jalen Daniels, who was red hot throwing the football. And the worst case scenario for the Eagles is okay, the running game works when you're ahead. What happens if you fall behind by a touchdown or more and Jalen Hurts suddenly has to throw the football? That's to be a bit of a concern now. He's done a good job of not throwing the ball over, just one interception. He's lost 2 fumbles since week 5. 16 touchdowns and throw for 13 in that span. But you got a guy who's coming off a concussion, and he hurt his knee as well. So those are 2 major concerns in itself. Is Jalen Hurts being a little more gun shy to throw the football? I noticed that this is like the Jalen Hurts we were starting to see towards the tail end of last season, and that wild card loss against Tampa Bay when he just didn't want, just didn't get rid of the football when there was plays downfield to be had. It's just to the point where if I'm AJ Brown, I might just add to my reading my reading list because
Sideline library.
yeah, because at this point, if you're a wide receiver, you're running downfield, you're basically doing it for the exercise because Jalen Hurts is not getting rid of the football, and he's going to need to do that. I mean, you can't hold. He's taking a lot of sacks, he's taking a lot of punishment that he probably don't need, and I'm kind of surprised that the Eagles are not calling more screens, are not getting more bubble, getting the ball in their hands a little more quicker, just at the very least get him into some kind of momentum and to get his confidence up. And for the Eagles, and look, the running game was great against a Commanders team that has not done a good job of stopping the run. Against the Eagles in particular, 228 yards in week 11, 211 in week 16. But at the same time, you want to you're not going to win a Super Bowl, let alone win a championship, NFC championship, if you can't play complete football. If you're going to be too one-sided on offense, because what happens if Saquon is slowed down, if you fall behind? Now, I think I've talked about this a few times. If you're going to play the Eagles, you kind of want Jalen Hurts to beat you with his arm rather than his legs. And now that he did hurt the knee, his legs might be a little compromised as well. So one of these I'm going to look for is just what do the Eagles do to get the ball out of his hands, to maybe protect him from not taking so much punishment, but more importantly, how much is that knee going to take away his ability to keep plays alive and really get out of the pocket if he is rushed? So Philadelphia's got their work cut out.
What's going to be very interesting about that game, especially, is the fact that Jalen Hurts is right now not even close to most of the stats that Jaden Daniels has. Jaden Daniels has by far been the better passer and probably the better runner. Hurts has more touchdowns this season. He has 14. But right now, Daniels is the quarterback you would trust more in this game. So it'll be very interesting to see. Different type of participation. There was snow going on in Philadelphia, but in Ford Field last Saturday, the Commanders gave us some rating of points. Rating it points like nobody's business. 45 of them. In an upset win over the number 1 seeded Detroit Lions. Boy, I would love to be the defensive coordinator of that team. Oh, wait, he's in New York now. We'll talk about him in a second. Now Washington, with rookie Jaden Daniels, looks to make history and send a rookie signal caller to the big game for the very first time. Reno was a sophomore when he did it, so just if anyone wants to mention that. Jay, what did you see from Washington last Saturday that makes you think that that's going to happen?
The biggest thing that stood out to me in the Commanders' upset win over the Lions was just how well offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury called the game. Granted, having a quarterback like Jaden McDaniels does give him a bit of a cheat code, but the narrative that has surrounded Kingsbury ever since he came into the NFL, and more so during his time as head coach and play caller with the Cardinals with Kyler Murray as his quarterback, was that his offense stops being effective after the season gets past the midpoint. Now, there was some of that this season with the Commanders, but I think we can attribute a decent percentage of that to Daniels battling a rib injury during weeks 8 through 11. Now, he may yet have to answer that question again against an Eagles team that will be seeing his offense for the 3rd time this season. But if what I saw in the win over the Lions carries over, that narrative may be a thing of the past. Kingsbury seemed to have answers for whatever Lions defensive coordinator, and now new Jets head coach, Aaron Glenn, threw at him at the start and then continued to adapt and find new answers as the game rolled on. It didn't matter if Glenn blitzed or just sent four to create pressure, whether he played man or zone or combo in coverages, the Lions had no answers for whatever Kingsbury called, whether it was RPOs, straight runs, design quarterback runs, straight drop back, or rollouts, and regardless of the personnel groupings and or alignments. Kingsbury was able to successfully dial up plenty of RPOs in the win over Detroit, largely because Daniels has shown a knack beyond his years for making the correct read on RPOs, and they can run it out of almost any personnel grouping. Even if a play where they have, let's say, trips to one side, either in a wide or bunch formation, and it's designed to be a run, Daniels has the ability to make a change and call a bubble screen to one of his wide receivers if he sees a favorable look on the outside. Outside of Terry McLaurin, Washington doesn't have a great group of wide receivers, but Olamide Zaccheaus and Dyami Brown, who has come on as late as a legit option in the passing game, 11 catches on 13 targets, 187 yards, 17 a catch, and a touchdown over the two playoff wins. Both are good blockers, and that goes a long way towards the Commanders being able to be successful on perimeter screens, which is exactly what happened on the play where McLaurin took it 58 yards to the house. The Lions blitzed both the nickel and the linebacker to the trip side of the ball, leaving them exposed on the perimeter. The result, 6 points. Now, when straight dropbacks were called, Kingsbury consistently had chip help from either a running back or a tight end as part of the protection scheme for Daniels, which stoned Detroit's blitzers and gave Daniels time to go through his progressions and check down if needs be. Lions defense was second in the NFL in blitz percentage in the regular season, 34.6%, and they went after Daniels full force, but to no avail as the rookie quarterback went 12 for 16, that's 75% completion percentage, for 191 yards, 11.9 per attempt, and a touchdown against the Lions blitz. That is the second most passing yards against the blitz by a rookie in a game since 2016, regular season or postseason. Daniels finished the season ranked in the top 4 in QBR against both man coverage and blitz. So pick your poison. Kingsbury is effective at creating leverage for his receivers with picks against tight man coverage, and Daniels' ability as a scrambler stretches defenses. Washington's no huddle, which they run 3 times as much as any other team, can gas a defense as the game wears along. Kingsbury showed all of that against the Lions, and they just could not keep up. In the running game, Kingsbury went back to his air raid college roots, calling runs from the shotgun, but having them go to the side where the running back lined up as opposed to the opposite side, which is how most shotgun run plays are done in the NFL. In other words, if the running back aligned to the left, that usually meant the run was going to the right or vice versa. Defenses know this and often align their front strength to match. Going against the tendency of most shotgun runs allowed Kingsbury to pull offensive linemen and hit some of those same side runs that many other offenses don't have in their playbooks. But it was when Washington needed to convert on fourth downs, always a thing when Dan Quinn is your boss, that Kingsbury really shined. Other than the botched trick play on 4th and 3 from the Detroit 9 with 13-13 to go in the second quarter, with Washington trailing 7-3, where backup quarterback Marcus Mariota motioned from the outside to take the snap in a weirdest quarterback sneak I've ever seen. It blew up in their faces. One of the few Kingsbury play calls that wasn't executed to perfection. The Commanders converted their next 4 attempts on fourth down. Daniels picked up a 4th and 2 with his legs when Lions cornerback Terrion Arnold got caught peeking into the backfield and wasn't able to contain Daniels from getting outside. Lions had 12 men on the field for a 4th and 2 inside the 5-yard line that created a first down. And Kingsbury went back to those air raid routes, and Daniels hit McLaurin on a nice mesh concept to convert another 4th and 2. All of those drives ended in touchdowns. Every time Detroit threatened to make it a game, Kingsbury found the right play to call, and Daniels executed it brilliantly. And because they were able to do so, Washington is 1 game away from the Super Bowl. Kingsbury showed his ability to adapt against the Eagles during the regular season as well, making changes from the game plan in Week 11 that resulted in a loss to the game plan that he ran in Week 16, such as increasing the number of plays out of empty backfields and moving McLaurin around to create advantageous matchups after having to play almost exclusively on the offensive left. His slot snaps McLaurin's slot snaps nearly doubled, say that 5 times fast, and his work from the wide right led to a stat line of 5 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. The Commanders did commit 5 turnovers in that win, including 2 picks by McDaniels, but his 3 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter led the Commanders to a come-from-behind win. It's never easy playing a division rival in the playoffs, as they have 2 games of film on you from the regular season, allowing you to see where they beat your defensive concepts. Does Kingsbury still have some tricks up his sleeve, plays that Philly hasn't seen yet? If he does, and his cheat code of a quarterback can execute them as perfectly as he did against Detroit, well, the Washington may be back in the Super Bowl for the first time since 1991.
Hail to the Redskins. 1991 season, by the way, 92.
Okay.
92.
Yeah.
So
I go by seasons.
Either way, it's fine. This is the year of Super Bowl 26 happened. We could have a rematch, by the way, in Super Bowl 26 if everything comes about. We could have a rematch of Super Bowl 57 if everything comes about one way or another.
Well now.
Okay. So I had Jalen Hurts as my angle, but somebody decided to take most of that stuff. I haven't bet. That's totally worry. So let me just mention a few more things about Hurts before I move on into what the wide receivers are doing, what they need to do. 630 rushing yards this season for Hurts, and even though he has a bulky knee and he's had it all season, when you saw him run his 44-yard touchdown on Sunday, that was the longest touchdown run of his entire career, shockingly enough. You would think, being in the league longer, he would have that. So always have to worry about his feet in situations, and that could turn out to be that type of game. However, you got 2 wide receivers, shockingly, who are much better right now than what they've been given. And that's what I'm worried about in terms of what could derail the Eagles to making the Super Bowl. Did you know that Devontae Smith is now the Eagles' all-time leader in postseason reception yards? The guy who was born in 1998 just went past Harold Carmichael's 465 career receiving yards in Sunday's game. Now, he had a kind of meh game, so to speak. He actually had to break that twice because he got tackled for a loss in that same game. 1,000-yard receiver each year, 343 receptions, 492 yards, 28 touchdowns, only 4 receptions for 21 yards. In this postseason, it's only at 8 receptions for 76 yards in 2 games that they've had. Now, there is so many mouths to feed on this team. You also forget about Dallas Goedert, who is one of the better catching tight ends in all of the NFL. But you got a guy who's had such great postseason stats, also had 100 yards in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. So Devontae Smith is a huge key. And obviously, we can't forget about everyone's favorite inner excellence reader, and that's A.J. Brown. That's the book, actually. Right. In the 2 playoff wins that they've had, 3 catches for 24 yards for A.J. Brown. That's, again, in 2 games. Earlier this season, in a game where they just beat the Carolina Panthers, that's the game where Nick Sirianni was fighting with fans, even though they actually won the game. Brown had to call out the offense because of the 4-catch, 49-yard performance. He's a little more cooler now, said I can't worry about it. I can only look at the film and learn from it. And Brown's had some nice blocks in these playoffs. He's done more blocking for Saquon Barkley's big runs than he's actually done catching. Now, all that being said, you need to be good on both sides of the ball to make the Super Bowl, and that's what Philly's going to need to do. I think we can expect Saquon to get his most likely, and I trust him when I'm up 20, down 20, up 6, down 6. He's just been that good this year, and has been one of the best weapons almost in NFL history with the ball. So I trust him there. But eventually, you can't just win a game on the ground. So that's something I'm going to be looking forward to. For the Commanders, their defense has been better, and obviously their defense caused a ton of turnovers last week, 5 of them. against the Detroit Lions. 3 passing for Jared Goff. 1 whatever the F Jameson Williams was doing on that pass, and the worst trick play I think I've ever seen in playoffs history. But still a problem for the Washington Commanders. 105 yards and 2 touchdowns for Jahmyr Gibbs in that game, and you're going up against Saquon Barkley, so good luck with that, Washington. The Commanders going into the Lions game were 29th in defensive EPA in man coverage and 22nd in zone coverage. Yay. But in late down and also in late down, likely pass and trailing situations this year, 18th, 19th, 26th going into that game itself as well. And in that game, again, the Detroit Lions had 8.7 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns, 201 yards, and then 4 yards a carry for the Bucs, and Bucky Irving was running all over them more late in the game. They're just not good against the run. 137.5 rushing yards per game in the entire season. That's 30th. A rush EPA of negative 0.019. That's 26th. And a 42.9 rush success rate. That's 24th. 4 Commanders' opponents, including the NFL playoffs, have rushed for 200 yards. And it's not great when your team that you're going up against is good on the ground most of the time. So I worry about the big play being a problem against the Washington Commanders all on Sunday. One thing you want to look out for also on the passing game is Marshawn Lattimore versus A.J. Brown. Brown led all receivers with 35-plus targets and yards per reception versus zone coverage this season. 67% of targets thrown his way in that zone coverage for 580 receiving yards. If that kind of meshes it together, if Brown wins that matchup, I think Philly wins this game. If Washington wins this matchup, they're going to be a little better in terms of just keeping Philly down. Philly's going to have to work, in their case, for their touchdowns. And if they don't, they go for big plays. Philly makes their second Super Bowl in 3 years. See what happens. And now we get to the part of the program that we've delayed for a while, a long while. Our local football post-mortem for this long forgotten season. The New York Giants, after a 3-14 2024 campaign, hold the number 3 draft pick in their hands, and they have a lot of work, and I mean a lot of work to do. So let's try to do some of that here. Jay, in regard to the offense, what's priority number 1 as this offseason continues?
I mean, it's the Captain Obvious, and it is the elephant in the room and has been, ever since basically since week 1, I want to say. Figure out the quarterback plan, draft, free agent, other. I got news for Giants fans who think that winding up with the number 3 overall pick in the draft gives them a decent shot at their next franchise quarterback. But to be honest, I'm not sure either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders are worth the pick, though Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen may think differently after they do their evaluations. Personally, based on what I've seen this past season, more of Ward than Sanders, to be transparent. Ward is the more NFL ready of the two, in my humble opinion, but that should be taken with the proverbial grain of salt, as neither one would have been a first-round pick in last year's quarterback-laden draft, and with good reason. They may be the best available quarterbacks in this draft class, though both could already be off the board by the time the Giants pick at number 3, as both Tennessee and Cleveland could and should be looking for other options at quarterback. But both Ward and Sanders have flaws that concern me enough to believe that neither is ready to be a QB1 from jump. With Ward, it's his general quarterbacking process and habits. His 14.1% off target rate is higher than any of the top 2 quarterbacks taken over the last 5 years by nearly 2%. With Sanders, it's his inconsistency with his drops. He's either too early or too late, and thus not often in exact rhythm with his target. I'll dive more into this stuff as we get closer to the NFL draft. So it definitely behooves the Giants to explore all options as they look for their 2025 starter. There are options, though each one comes with its own issues. And that's part of the issue as the Giants look to formulate a plan for both the immediate present and the subsequent future of the most important position on the offensive side of the ball. They are one of several teams that need to upgrade the position, and we'll be looking at the same options as the Giants. I'm going to preface this right now, guys, as I dive into these options. A lot of this is going to apply when we talk about the Jets in the next segment. Spoiler alert. So I'm essentially setting it up for that as well. The list of potentially available veteran quarterbacks currently under contract is an existing one. Kirk Cousins, who has a no-trade clause, will very likely get cut by Atlanta at some point after disastrously flaming out in the second half of the season being replaced by rookie Michael Penix Jr. Aaron Rodgers and all the extra stuff he brings might not be what Aaron Glenn wants for his QB1 as he takes over the Jets. And there's also a question of whether the 41-year-old Rodgers even wants to play another season. The Saints' Derek Carr and the Seahawks' Geno Smith could also wind up being salary cap casualties. We all know Smith's history with the Giants. And then there is the situation in Pittsburgh, as Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields, both of whom were signed to one-year deals, may not be retained by Mike Tomlin, as the Steelers could also look to some of these veterans to upgrade their quarterback room. Wilson went 6-5 as the starter and had led the Steelers to the playoffs, but he's 36 years old and seemed to regress down the stretch. His inability to make the plays he did, going 6-1 after taking over for Fields, is a big reason the Steelers ended the season on a 4-game losing streak and got whooped by the arch-rival Ravens in the wildcard round. As for the 25-year-old Fields, who went 4-2 as the starter at the beginning of the season, I don't think he gave the Steelers enough of a reason to believe he can be a dependable starting quarterback in the NFL. Fields said as much himself. So with that as prelude, the decision Pittsburgh makes with their quarterback situation will have a huge impact on the available options for all of the other teams that have a need at the position. The big free agent quarterback is Sam Darnold, and despite his late season and wildcard round nosedive, the prevailing opinion amongst NFL personnel folk is that the former 2018 number 3 overall pick will still get paid by a quarterback-needy team if he doesn't get franchise tagged by the Vikings. Darnold may be the top prize, but there are some other interesting quarterbacks that could join him on the free agency market, like Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, Andy Dalton, Mac Jones, or Jarrett Stidham. None of them will have Giants fans dancing in the aisles of the Meadowlands, and the organization should aim higher. But if all else fails, Brissett and Dalton might be the best options as obvious bridge quarterbacks, as both have played the role before and very recently. Brissett this season in New England as the bridge to rookie Drake May, and Dalton in Carolina the last 2 years as the backup and mentor to Bryce Young. Ideally, having a veteran quarterback on the roster means they wouldn't need to force a rookie into the starting lineup on opening day. Luckily, the Giants are in good standing financially to add a quality veteran, so they have around $43 million in available cap space, 13th most in the NFL, for 2025, according to Over the Cap. So, in a vacuum, the captain obvious move going down that road would be to go after Darnold with as much of that available $43 million cap space as they can. But considering how things went the last time Darnold had a locker at the Meadowlands, he may not want to take another bite of the Big Apple. The 36-year-old Cousins, a 4-time Pro Bowler who has a solid career resume and would be another year removed from his Achilles injury, and the 33-year-old Carr, also a 4-time Pro Bowler, who has been a victim of bad situations despite putting up solid numbers every year he's been in the league, are the two I would entertain as far as reliable veteran quarterbacks go, as they could give the Giants both short and potentially semi-long-term options. Are they perfect options? Will either one give the Giants a back-page press conference win? No, and not likely, but perfect isn't available. And to be honest, winning the back-page press conference means absolutely nothing in terms of resulting in on-field production. The best-case scenario would have the Giants going into the spring with a reliable veteran and a promising rookie. The worst-case scenario? Well, as Charlotte Carroll, Giants beat writer for The Athletic, wrote in her January 21st piece, it's hard to get much worse than what we just watched this season. And as co-owner John Mara bluntly put it earlier this month, quote, once you solve the quarterback issue, a lot of these other things will improve as well. That's the universal NFL truth, guys. Bottom line, This is the number one issue facing the Giants this offseason, no matter which road they take in resolving it. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll need to get this right.
And the question is, if it's a bridge, you don't know if you're going to get it right possibly for a year. And though even if it's a rookie, you don't know if you're going to get it right for a year. And that just seems more like a team that would have time to do it. But they're on the hot seat.
Right. That's why I'm suggesting you don't go with that they should lean towards something more than just your basic bridge. And I think Carr and or Cousins are in that area.
Yeah. The problem with Cousins is there's been rumors that he doesn't want to come to New York. No, I understand. I'm just trying to make my points here.
None of these options are perfect, but
No, they're not. And I also, Carr may not end up leaving New Orleans because honestly, I don't know who they have. Because again, as I've said before, there's not enough good quarterbacks to go around right now.
Yep.
That's damn sure. Okay. Anthony, same thing. Defense time. What's on the top of their to-do list this off season?
Off season.
I said off season. I didn't do anything
wrong. For the Giants, their priority as far as defense is they got to add some depth, and clearly we get to the defensive line. And after Dexter Lawrence got hurt, and there was pretty much nothing else at the tackle position, and it showed the Giants one of the worst teams to stop at a run this season. 68 plays of 20 yards or more, which is six, most of the NFL. 24th overall defensively, 21st in points allowed per game. They only forced 15 takeaways the entire season. Only 14 forced fewer. The Raiders, Patriots, Browns, and the Jaguars. No coincidence. All those teams missed the playoffs. So for the Giants, you have to add some depth on the defensive line, and also in the secondary as well. And looking at some of the available defensive tackles for free agency, there's some couple of options out there. You got BJ Hill. Remember the Giants traded away in Cincinnati a few years ago. Maybe a guy like Calais Campbell can step in for maybe a 1-year deal. The key is, though, the Giants need to add guys that they can rotate in and out of this defensive line. When you also have Brian Burrows and Kayvon Thibodeau, if he can stay healthy, stay on the field, it would be a formidable defensive line when you get a healthy Lawrence. But you have to be able to rotate guys in and out of the lineup and keep them fresh. And the Giants just didn't have that at all last season. And they showed, especially trying to stop the run. But the biggest disappointment in this Giants defense had to be the secondary. And you kind of knew with the safeties in the last few years, losing Xavier McKinney in last offseason, that there would be a drop-off in the safety position, but they just didn't do a whole lot about it as far as replacing McKinney. And Deontay Banks just completely had a year of stepping back. It's just look, when you're 3-14, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed on both sides of football. But when you look at the secondary, the Giants was hoping Banks could be that number one shutdown guy, but he played so bad at times of the season. He was actually benched against the Steelers in week 8 of this season. That's just how bad he has been. But they had some notable bright spots with Tyler Nubin in the defensive backfield, but they had to bring in some kind of, obviously they had to bring in some help on the corner side. Remember last year it was the number 2 defensive back position that was kind of a question mark. Now going into this offseason, it might be both defense starting corners at this point. Drew Phillips has been a good young piece to speak of, but you feel like the Giants need to add maybe a couple of veteran guys in the secondary to kind of shore things up. As far as this defense is concerned, look, it's the Giants. For the most part, you would have thought defensive would be the strength, but when you have an offense that has struggled and a defense that can't stop anybody, on top of not being able to get off the field, or stay on the field because the offense is not being able to maintain drives. It's a combination of disaster, and the Giants definitely have their work cut out for them. I mean, they have to add some bodies up front. They have to add some veteran leadership in the defensive backfield as well. So those are the two main things the Giants have to do, and they also have to be smart about the draft. Maybe they can do it that way through the draft. Maybe add a couple of veteran guys through free agency. They have the cap space to play around with, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Deontay Banks is a very good example of some of the failures of this organization. And he was supposed to be a number one quarterback. By the way, Xavier McKinney, eight interceptions this year. Luckily, he didn't leave the NFL. He got taken over late, but he was still second in the NFL with 8 interceptions. Moved up to get Banks in the draft, had a just terrible year. Got benched late in the season. Also, along with that benching in Pittsburgh, and it's just been terrible in terms of he was like Wink Martindale and didn't prove anything with Shane Bowen as a defensive coordinator. Okay, so there will be no coaching change for the Giants this year. There will be no general manager change for the Giants this year. It was a little bit of a surprise. But overall, I think the Giants knew with the 2 years, 3 years that they've had in the previous organizations, the easiest thing to do was to stay the course. You saw a lot of problems this year with the Giants in terms of just coaching. In fact, a lot of bad key decision making. They led the league in illegal shift penalties. They cycled through quarterbacks a ton. They kind of mistreated Daniel Jones on the way out. We'll get to Daniel Jones also a little bit later on in the final rant. And then when they had a loss 31-7 to the Buccaneers, Brian Daboll said the effort wasn't the problem. And if you saw the game, the effort was a problem. It may not have been the problem, but it was definitely a problem. And there was just a lot of just not use of players throughout the season. And yes, Brian Daboll is by far a player-friendly coach. But sometimes you may not need that. Now, this team had to go through a lot of other changes defensively. Not surprising. Jerome Henderson fired last week. Mike Trier, the safeties coach, fired. We'll talk about the guy who replaced him in a second. They also fired their special teams coordinator, their offensive line coach, their offensive linebackers coach, and their defensive assistant. They did that right after the season. It's just an organization that has kind of failed in a lot of different ways. Now they got Marquand Manuel, who is defensive backs coach for the Jets, who's moving over to the other side of the ledger with the Giants, and that's been a nice little hire. But here's the thing: I think that'll be something that could help this team next season. Although you never always see the defensive coach helping out too much in the whole scheme of things. But here's the question: what is the measure of success next season for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen? You're at the bottom, perfectly fine. You know this is not a playoff team. You're not going to go from 3 wins to 10 wins easily. That's not going to happen. And you're in a division that has 2 playoff teams this year. In fact, 2 teams that are competing for the NFC Championship. And the Dallas Cowboys, who was probably a Dak Prescott injury away from being a playoff team themselves. So you have one of the toughest schedules in the league next year. I think it is the toughest schedule in the league when you go by record from year to year. What is the measure of success? What do you want to see from that team? Can you go from 3 to 7 wins and say we are ready for the future? Can you draft a quarterback and say we are ready for the future and do something? Because if you draft a quarterback and you change it in year 2, that doesn't really help that quarterback at all.
Nope.
So there's a lot of things that need to be determined, and I think keeping Daboll and Shane was the right move. Now you have to determine how much longer you want to keep Daboll and Shane. And if you want an example of how not to do things, go over to the Jets and Robert Saleh and what they did this past season. And just remember, that's not how you do it. You have to do it. Whatever they did, do the opposite and see what happens in 2025. Right. We got a little more to go here. And That is the Jets. After a 5-12 record in 2024, earning them pick number 7 in the NFL draft. Can't get any better than 7 after being 5-12. What a great league this is. The Jets have as many, if not more, of the issues that their MetLife Stadium co-tenants do. Let's examine. Jay, the offensive portion of Gang Green at times was offensive in 2024. What's the number one priority going into 2020?
Yeah, just like, their fellow denizens of MetLife Field, it's figuring out the quarterback, position. Aaron Rodgers or plan B or C or D. As I
Don't
said,
tell it. Plan B is not a shot, though. Don't worry, Aaron. This is not a vaccine. Don't worry about that part. Plan B is something completely different.
touche, well played, partner. Like their fellow tenants of MetLife Stadium, Gang Green also needs to figure out the QB1 position. Now, as I noted in our Giants segment, Aaron, the quarterback, may not be the route that Aaron, the new head coach, wants to go as he looks to put his stamp on things. Despite Rodgers putting up the best season by a Jets quarterback in recent memory, completing 63% of his passes for 3,897 yards, 229 yards per game, 6.7 per attempt, with 28 touchdowns against 11 picks and a 90.5 passer rating. And again, who knows if the 41-year-old Rodgers even wants to play next season. Then again, both quarterback and coach could surprise all of us and take a shot at coexisting next season, which could give the Jets another season of serviceable quarterback play, but that would probably require Rodgers agreeing to run the offense of whomever Glenn hires to run that side of the ball. One thing to keep in mind is that if Rodgers does elect to return to the Jets, chances are pretty good that his BFF and favorite pitch and catch partner, wide receiver Davante Adams, would very likely come back as well. Not sure how the Jets' other starting wide receiver, Garrett Wilson, would feel about that reunion, but I won't speculate on it unless both former Packers return. The Jets have the number 7 pick in the draft, as Rabbi said, so unless they can somehow trade up into either of the first 2 picks, they won't be taking a quarterback in the first round, and maybe not in the second round either, as the list of draft-eligible quarterbacks after Sanders and Ward, Alabama's Jalen Milroe, Texas's Quinn Ewers, Syracuse's Kyle McCord, and Will Howard, the quarterback who replaced McCord at Ohio State, they look like day 2 picks at best, in my humble opinion, and by that I mean round 3, which leaves the Jets with some of the same options as the Giants and all those other quarterback-needy teams that are not likely or not able to use a high draft pick on a quarterback this year, -1. Sam Darnold is not going to don the green and white again, no matter how much money Woody Johnson theoretically might throw at him, should his sons tell him that Sam's Madden rating is worth a multi-year deal for millions of dollars. I won't rerun the list of veteran quarterback options, but I'm in favor, I've already done that, but I'm in favor of having a proven veteran at the controls, regardless of any draft plans for the position, even if they elect to use a day 2 or day 3 pick this year on one of those other college quarterbacks I just mentioned. So, like with the Giants, I think Cousins, who has a career passer rating of 97.4, or Carr, who has a career passer rating of 92.8, are worth a conversation, as they could provide the Jets with both short and potentially semi-long-term options. Or maybe the Jets go into this offseason looking strictly for a bridge option, such as Brissett or Dalton, or even Tyrod Taylor, who is the only healthy quarterback the Jets currently have under contract, and save their chips for the 2026 draft, which is projected to have a better quarterback class. Arch Manning, anyone? I know. Woody Johnson, unlike John Mara, does want to win the back page and the press conference, and he has less patience than my niece's brand new puppy when it comes to long-term big picture football planning and decision-making. But hopefully, for Jets fans, getting Aaron Glenn, one of the best cornerbacks to ever play the position and who spent his first 8 seasons of his illustrious 15-year NFL career as a Jet and is still considered a legend by those fans. Hopefully that satisfied Johnson's thirst for ego boosts and fan approval, and he steps back and gives the new GM, new head coach, and whomever is hired as the new offensive coordinator, allows them to fill the quarterback room with people who fit the offensive scheme they want to run, with one eye on the present and another on the future.
There is a lot of I think Rodgers makes sense to keep another year just because, again, what other options are there?
There
But
are
I haven't.
options that you may not like the options, but there are
But
options.
again, I think better options is the question, and I don't know if that's a thing.
Here's the caveat, though. We have seen in the past that Rodgers tends to have an issue when he does not have total control of the offense
And
that's
you'll know that too. You'll
right.
know that
Exactly.
early,
He's not
luckily.
shy about it. He thinks he knows better than whoever his offensive coordinator is. And that's the caveat. That's the only way I see him coming back is if once
Oh
Aaron
yeah,
Glenn, if it decides who he wants to hire as offensive coordinator, and I haven't seen any names thrown about yet.
Steve Wilkes is offensive coordinator. I've heard
Offensive
Todd
coordinator.
Haley.
I know Steve Wilkes is thrown out as defensive
Todd
coordinator.
Haley has been thrown out
Todd
for
Haley's
offensive
been
coordinator.
okay. But until they make a decision, and that whoever he decides on, that'll tell you what type of offense they're kind of looking to run, or at least the philosophy they're looking to use. That'll tell you whether or not what the chances are of Rodgers returning is. Because if it's an offense that's completely different than what he's accustomed to, he's not going to want to come back. And Aaron Glenn, unlike the other people who have been in the Jets coaching staff over the last couple of years, I don't think Aaron Glenn is the type of guy who's going to sit back and let Aaron Rodgers basically do whatever the hell he wants. I don't see that happening. And I don't think whoever he brings in as offensive coordinator is going to be that type of guy either.
Well, WWBPG, and we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. Anthony, the defense stepped back a tiny bit in 2024. They got some priority too this offseason. What's at the top?
Well, look at the Jets. They finished 19th in pass defense, 21st against the run. And this is the thing about it, the Jets defense was kind of the backbone of this team for the last 3 seasons. And when you have 10 free agents on the defensive side of football, you're pretty much looking at a full size overhaul. And it may be what the Jets need because uh, at some point you do realize that a defensive unit that has been bend but don't break for the last few seasons, eventually it's going to break. And part of it is the part of it is the offense side of football, like
Ouch.
they done. But take it from me, who was in attendance to a couple of those Jet games. When you lose 5 games this year, when you had a lead in the fourth quarter and you give it up. In fact, the Jets finished 3-7 in one possession games this season, which clearly tells you either the offense didn't do anything, but more importantly, and particularly against Indianapolis, I was at that game live in person. That defense could not stop Anthony Richardson for anything, and
Nope.
it cost them in the long run. Um, the the defense just has a lot of free agents. I'm looking at the pending free agents now for the Jets. Hassan Reddick, and we remember his the issues with the hold at the beginning of this season. D, you got DJ Reed. Um, you have Isaiah Oliver, backup cornerback. Uh, there's a lot of defensive players that's going into free agency, and then you look at and then when you look at the the front line, the only two, really, Will McDonald was one of the few guys that they had as a solid pass rusher. This season, he led the team with 10 and a half sacks. But there really has not, this team really needs to change things up. I mean, maybe it gets to that point. Sauce Gardner said earlier I think it was like several weeks ago, he said that when they got Aaron Rodgers back, maybe the defense felt too comfortable. That's not something you want to hear out of your
Oh,
start defensive back whatsoever, because it's pretty much saying that the team took their foot off the gas pedal because they thought with Aaron Rodgers back, the offense would be in high gear. But the Jets calling card, literally the last few seasons have been their defense. It got notable woes, no coincidence. Robert Sala was fired after that game overseas in the loss to Minnesota. So this is a team that's just gonna have to get another identity. I mean, because
yeah.
you look at what they have right now, Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, two guys who can go after the quarterback, but not much else. they really haven't gotten anybody else next to Quentin Williams. This is another situation. Well, just like the Giants, the Jets are gonna have to really just refigure the entire defensive defensive side of football. Depends on who comes as the coordinator as well. You know, what system do you bring the play? What players you get? What system you implement? How can you get the most out of your top guys that's on the roster? By the way, can anybody? I've been trying to get the stat up, but I can't find it. Can anyone remember the last time Gardner had an interception in a game? And I know when you're a good defensive back, teams avoid throwing in your direction.
That
But
is
this team
true.
did. But the Jets didn't take the ball away, even outside of Sauce Gardner this season. I mean, that's just been maybe it is a kind of a common denominator with both New York teams. Their inability to take the ball away and to make stops is kind of part of their downfall this season. But in the Jets' case, the defense inability to play up to what we've seen the last few seasons, whereas they were actually a better team, finished with better records. And left us one is saying if only they had a quarterback, maybe just team would be a playoff team. You can't say that about this Jet team. Both sides of football failed them. The front office, the coaching staff, everything, everything just went south. And Aaron Glenn, I said this in our group chat. Great hire, played for the Jets 8 seasons. I'm not going to mention the fake spike moment. I'm not going to mention that, but I do feel like he's a guy that is really highly regarded around the league. Maybe a cultural change, maybe what this team needs. Of course, we're gonna have a cultural change. Do you really, and Jay, you mentioned, do you really want Aaron Rodgers to be part of that?
Yep.
But maybe on the defensive side of the football too. Maybe you have a guy like Gardner who maybe needed a little bit of humble pie. Can you bring back DJ Reed? I mean, gotta have somebody play that number 2 position. Gotta have somebody. Gotta have figure out what's going on with the safety position. So there's a lot of things that is wrong with this football team. And on defense, you're gonna definitely see an entirely new group come next season when it comes to game green.
If it ends up being Garrett Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, I have a feeling the Jets will go with Garrett Wilson, but I don't think it's going to be a mirror the dog type situation for the Jets in 2025, or at least for the hope. Just knock a few points down on the Madden rating on Garrett Wilson, then they'll be like, yeah, we can get rid of him. Okay, so obviously, as Anthony mentioned, and then forgot that I was talking about him, Aaron Glenn is the hire for the New York Jets in 2025, and I like the move. Now, I think the Jets needed an offensive guy, in my opinion, but you need to get the best quality candidate. And Aaron Glenn not only is a very good quality candidate for the years he's been doing very good things in Detroit, I'll talk about that in a second. He wanted to be here. I think he wanted to be here. This was probably his first choice. And unlike Liam Cohen of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, look it up if you haven't seen the stuff that has happened with him over the last 24 hours. Aaron Glenn had no wavering of this situation. He wanted to have a head coaching job, but this is a place where he was Darrelle Revis before Darrelle Revis actually came around. 24 career interceptions, that's third on the team's all-time list. And that mark was finally actually snapped by Darrelle Revis, who had his 25th and last interception in 2016. He had 3 pick sixes as a Jet. And remember I just said WWBPD beforehand? His mentor is Bill Parcells, so I think instead of he's going to ask what would Bill Parcells do in this situation, and you could do worse than a guy who is one of the best coaches of all time being your mentor. If you notice how, yes, the Detroit Lions were just massacred this year on defense in terms of losing 16 guys at any point during the year, but they just continued to grow in terms of the defense. You had one of the worst defenses in the NFL just 2 years ago, 32nd. They moved over to 20th, but they were now 5th in rushing yards per game allowed and 7th in points per game allowed. But again, you're doing it with a lot less than other groups have done. It's the second lowest completion percentage, by the way, 61.1%, and they also led the lowest passer rating of 82 this past year. He's been with Dan Campbell in Detroit for 4 years, moved there in 2021. And you have a guy who is just a motivator, is looking to really, really show himself as one of the guys who can really help this team along. And I'm interested to see. Now, obviously, the next goal is going to be, most importantly, who's going to be the offensive coordinator. Two choices at this end. I mentioned Todd Haley, former Chiefs head coach. The bigger story could be the guy who has helped Jared Goff kind of improve over his last few years, the 5 touchdown interception thing notwithstanding. And that's Mark Brunell, who he brought over as a quarterbacks coach from the Saints over to the Lions. So I would keep those two names in mind. They're interesting. Obviously, we just talked about it. Steve Wilkes, who's had many good years with many good teams and kind of got screwed out of Carolina's head coaching job, is the main candidate that they're targeting, defensive coordinator. This is a highly respected and sought coach, is only 52, so he's going to be one of the younger coaches out there. I mean, obviously, got 39 and 40-year-old coaches, but I think can do much worse than Aaron Glenn. Again, I want a guy who wants to be a Jet, and I think he really wants to be in this organization, and I think it's going to take a while. I think it's going to take a little bit of moving, but if the Jets can kind of find a little way to get this team together and kind of build a good staff around him, because I think one thing that Robert Saleh didn't do as head coach, forget about the Ulbrich stuff. Ulbrich was a terrible head coach, but is just not connect to any of his players throughout the time. Obviously, that included Brett Favre. I mean, that included Aaron Rodgers, but we could talk about Aaron Rodgers another day. And that's something I would like to know. By the way, how would you like to be the Detroit Lions? You get to an NFC championship. You have that big loss this year. Now you have to replace both your offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, who's gone to Chicago, and your defensive coordinator at the same season. Didn't work too well for Philadelphia, by the way. So Aaron Glenn is an interesting choice. 4th head coach of this team in the last decade. I believe the 6th coach now who is playing for his former team that he played for. Obviously, one of them is Mike Vrabel, who just got hired in this cycle.
Yes.
I'm very interested to see what the Aaron Glenn era has for the New York Jets, but you're hiring a up-and-coming coach, and I think as long as you have the good team around him and you have the good coordinators around him, and Steve Wilkes will definitely help out on the defense a lot, so Aaron Glenn can actually focus on coaching instead of more focusing on his side of the ball. I think this is going to be a very interesting coach going forward. All right. Tonight, we end as we think about the Eagles MVP this year. That's Saquon Barkley, also nominated for MVP. He's going to be a top 5 selection. And what could have been with the New York Giants? Now, before we start, I completely understand that Saquon Barkley would not have changed much of the 2024 Giants season. Almost nothing. Tyrone Tracy had a very good year. He's a much cheaper option. But even when you look at everything, towards the end of this, there are truly some hard knocks at the end of the season. Oh no, this is where the rant starts. After the Hard Knocks training camp, Hard Knocks in season, Hard Knocks playoffs, but they don't actually have that. But why the hell not? Let's just do Hard Knocks playoffs next. Oh, great. Last season, the NFL decided to do Hard Knocks off-season. And it was the Giants and their 100th anniversary that decided that they would be the sacrifice guinea pig inaugural team that set the standard of this series. And this was just a comedy of errors. And it wasn't Emmy winning. First, the confidence of former QB Daniel Jones got to the management. Sure, when a team does their due diligence at the most important position on the team, you want the best possible option. But if you can't get the best possible option, which they couldn't with their draft position, you want to make sure there isn't a reason why that QB would not be at his best in 2024. Whether it be the fawning of possible draft picks, I'm looking at you, Drake May, and a possible draft day trade-up, the reassuring Daniel that he is the guy while reminding the camera of how unsettled the quarterback position actually is, or the continued on-camera lack of confidence to the injuries and play of DJ, Hearing these things from sources is bad. Having them on camera is much, much worse. The only person that benefits through all of this is Liev Schreiber, who gets more checks for his very few words that he says on every voiceover he does for the 75 Hard Knocks.
Great at it, man.
He's really good at it, but it's like you're around all the time. But the reason you're still listening is for why this was a PR disaster. Let's talk about the Saquon thing. For what Saquon had done for the Giants, especially in his rookie season and his 2022 season, the first one with the playoff win in a decade, the only thing the Giant general manager, Joe Schoen, could do was scoff at how to value the running back. The back wasn't a big position, and we were wondering, was it ever going to make a comeback? Spoiler alert, it made a comeback. Here is the exact words that he said about Saquon. I'm torn, Ed. Ed is Ed Berry, Saquon's agent, because I think he can still play and I think he can help us, Schoen said. But I didn't want to comment on the numbers. I don't have a great idea where the market is. That's why I'm going to let the league tell him what it is. And hey, if you want to come back and be a Giant, let's try to find something that makes sense. If we're close, then let's have a conversation. Because again, I do think he was our best offensive player. Apparently, Joe Schoen should have read that running back text thread that was happening in the offseason about reevaluating the running back and making sure they get paid, because Schoen let Barkley hit the market and see what his value is, not willing to go the franchise player route again. Schoen said if Barkley wanted to be a Giant for life, he'd come back. Shockingly, in the year of our Lord 2024, no one would want to be a Giant for life right now. And so Barkley persisted to go to Philadelphia. Giant owner John Mara couldn't do anything about it. Schoen had the final decision. He is the general manager. Mara saying, if Barkley becomes an Eagle, I'll have a tough time sleeping. I'll tell you that. And so John Mara has probably been diagnosed with a severe case of insomnia because of that. If it wasn't the 8th 2,000-yard season in the NFL history, which was really one sit out away for the possible most yards in a season in NFL history, try the fact that Saquon, number 26, had 2/3 of the Philadelphia Eagles in their playoff game this past weekend. 2/3. Now Saquon is playing his best for the city of brotherly love, even better than he did at any point as a Giant. And even if you disagree or agree with that what the Giants did letting Barkley go, how could anyone look at that right now and say, sure, I understand that was the right move? That's right. You can't. And then, just to make the Hard Knocks embarrassment even more prevalent, footage came up this week of Joe Schoen talking about that quarterback on the other side of the ledger, Jaden Daniels. His own son said this about Jaden. Trade up and get him. Why not? You only get this job once. You need to try to win. Are you kidding me? Not saying much, but he's already a better son than any of the sons that are currently in the White House. It's a revelation. It happens to be as simple as this. This turned out to be a disaster for the Giants because they wanted to do something different with their organization. Put them on Hard Knocks. The optics of this organization look as bad as ever, and it started with this. And now there seems to be a reason why this might be a one-or-done idea. Nobody wants to be on Hard Knocks next offseason. I wonder why. Seeing how bad the Giants look right now, I don't blame people for not volunteering. Floor is yours.
Yeah, go ahead.
As a lifelong Giant fan, I have seen some lows. I think back to Ray Hanley coaching this team. I think back to the final days of the Dan Reeves era and the infamous snowball game against the Chargers at Giant Stadium. I think back to 4-12 in 2003 with basically a practice squad and Jim Foster coaching the last 4 games of the season, despite the fact that he had been fired right after Thanksgiving, but still allowed to coach the rest of the season. There have been some lows in my lifetime as a Giant fan. And just a couple years ago with Joe Judge and going for it on 4th down in your own, literally backed up to your own goal line to cap off the Joe Judge era. This year was embarrassing for so many reasons. and not be and look, Saquon Barkley having a phenomenal season, but he's on a better team. And this taking kid away. He's on a better team with the Philadelphia Eagles with better weapons offensively, a better offensive line that can actually open up holes for him to run behind, and a quarterback that is a dual threat, that is a more capable dual threat than Daniel Jones was. So that's number one. By the way, Xavier McKinney led the NFL in interceptions, so that's
He was number two, as I mentioned before on
he's
the
number
show. He
two.
was number two.
Okay, okay, so he's number two, but he helped the Packers get into the playoffs. So that's another kind of punch in the gut. The and the whole and the situation with Jalen Daniels, and I remember watching that episode, and thinking to myself, you know what? I don't know if this kid plays John Madden football, but I think he has a better idea of how to scout than Woody Johnson kids does. If he does rely on EA Sports for the scout reports, but it was just a tough year. I don't know what to say as a Giant fan. And never in my years that I could go on TickPick or StubHub and see Giants tickets going for $15 as it was the last regular season game, the last home game of the regular season, and it just sounds how bad it is. And the fact that they're staying the course and they making any coaching changes, which I'm not gonna lie, maybe give them one more. I think you give Joe Shane and um give this team one more year to see what happens. But you're not looking at this team as a playoff team whatsoever next year. Maybe you get lightning in a bottle, you sneak in as a seventh seed, whatever the case may be. Hey, look, it happened 2 years ago. We saw
It's
to
not
get in
happening.
with a 9-7-1 team, get in, even win a playoff game. Just think about how it felt to be a Giant fan around this time 13 years ago, winning the NFC Championship in San Francisco, or even 2 years ago, coming off a wild card win in Minnesota and thinking, hey, the future might be bright for this team. We finally have our quarterback. We have a star running back. We have a young, talented defense that's up and coming. And to see 2 years later, none of that is even there right now. It is, like I said, it's a really dark time to be a New York Giant. It's a dark time to be a New York football fan if you live in the tri-state area. Just entirely. Hey, look, there was a New York team that's still playing, and a team that actually plays in the state of New York. Um, so I'm like, hey, look, why not adopt the Buffalo Bills for a couple of weeks to be to be New York's team at this point? Hey, look, I have nothing against Josh Allen. I'm a big Haley Steinfeld fan anyway, but that's besides the point. I'm a fan of Bills Mafia. I mean, we saw what you mentioned Mark Andrews and everything that went on with him, and I attached you guys to the link. Bills Mafia raising money for his charity. And I was like, look, this is a fan base that put themselves through tables, but they love your team, and they're actually a class, and they're a class act because I remember Lamar Jackson getting knocked out of a playoff game with a concussion, and they donated to his favorite charity as well. So hey, look, I'll be an honorary Bills Mafia fan for a couple of weeks, but if you're a Giants or a Jets fan right now, you're just counting the days of spring training. Like, hey, can we get the baseball season already? Um, just have something to pin our hats on right now because New York football in 2024, it was like the Twilight Zone. You need Ross Sterling to give you a good voiceover to prepare you
Yeah.
for the episode that you're going to sit through. I would like it's like William Shatner on a
Yeah, no, I
plane.
understand.
It's William Shatner on the plane, and you see this goblin-like creature called New York Football on the plane on the wing, kind of tearing off the engine right now. That's how it feels to be a New York Football fan in 2024/2025.
574 winning percentage next year, by the way, for Giants opponents. You would think with 3 and 14 would get you a little bit better of a schedule. Jay, take us home.
Yeah, yeah. I'll take us home, but just to kind of bridge something. Anthony mentioning the Bills, our buddy Sean Roman is constantly reminding all of us at On the Sports Lines that they're technically, geographically is only one team that actually,
Sure.
plays in the state of New York, and that would be the Bills. And Anthony, you mentioning, Bills Mafia. I sent this to Rabbi earlier in the show on the side. I pulled it straight from an article from The Athletic. In the days following Baltimore's season-ending loss, a GoFundMe fundraiser originally organized by Bills fan Nicholas Howard, who I'm guessing is a member of Bills Mafia, has accumulated over $100,000 across more than 3,000 donations to a charity close to Andrews' heart. It's called Breakthrough T1D. Established in 1970, the nonprofit organization focuses on global type 1 diabetes research and advocacy for those who, like Andrews, have been impacted. So once again, Bills Mafia doing a nice thing to a vanquished foe, if you will. So there's that.
And that was, by the way, because of all the death threats that Mark Andrews was getting from a lot of people, and his wife was also getting those same things. So that's why the money was raised by Bills Mafia.
Think of Ryan Day and his wife and kids after Michigan, man. People, it's just a football game.
All right, take us home. Take us home, Jay.
I'll take us home. Could the 100th anniversary season have gone any worse for the Giants? As bad as the on-field product was, and there were times it was well nigh unwatchable, as we all often talked about on text. The case could be made, and Rabbi, you made the case, that the off-the-field optics made it even worse. I wholeheartedly agree with you about Hard Knocks. Gotta believe that Shane and Mara really wish they had found a way to stop HBO from airing the Barkley conversation. You can start there when it comes to optics, and you can end with the utter Charlie Foxtrot that was the handling of the end of the Daniel Jones era and the aftermath that followed, and then pick any one of the many moments in between. Here's one. Rookie wide receiver Malik Neighbors, frustrated with the Giants' less than serviceable quarterback play after Jones was released, bubbles over in a post-game media session after the 30-7 Week 12 loss to the Bucs, saying, quote, I mean, obviously it ain't the quarterback. Same outcome as when we had DJ at quarterback. Talk about a glaring indictment of the state of the team at that point. Then there were the planes flying over the Meadowlands for 2 straight weeks, calling out co-owner John Mara, asking him to, quote, please, PLZ, fix this dumpster fire the first time, and telling him, we won't stop until you fire everyone the second time. The lowlights outshine the highlights by a great deal. Granted, it's a very low bar. Yes, I know lowlights don't actually shine. Siri, what is irony, kids? Unfortunately, with so many things needing to be fixed, the immediate light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, North River in this case, is not hope, no matter how much fans like the three of us and our pal Joe Tafaro wish it was. Instead, it's an oncoming New Jersey transit train. Mr. Mara, I hope you know something the rest of us don't, because for the life of me, I can't figure out why you still feel that Joe Shane and Brian Dable, the architects of this disaster of a 100th anniversary season, are the ones to fix it.
Clusterfuck. Just a complete clusterfuck of a season, and I'll be happy to turn the page. Let's turn the page by ending the show. For Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, I am the unlucky individual that drew #1 in the podcast Royal Rumble. My name is Steve Rabinowitz. We are Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines Live, YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines On Demand, and on Twitter/X, your preference, Jay.
The handle is at ONTH Sportslines, where you'll find a link to each new show like tonight's, along with tidbits and nuggets from the world of sports that we think are worth your time to check out. This week, I've posted a link to a story I read in the print edition of the current issue of Sports Illustrated, where they named Simone Biles as their Sports Person of the Year for 2024. We gave Simone props on our Paris Olympics wrap-up show and flowers on our year-end award show, as the GOAT of women's gymnastics was our female athlete of the year. But her journey, what she went through both on and off the floor, physically, mentally, and emotionally, as chronicled by SI's Stephanie Apstein, from the low of the Tokyo Games to the top of the podium in Paris is nothing short of inspiring and makes Biles as worthy of SI's award as she was of ours. I highly recommend you giving it a read. It is very much worth your time.
Before we go, shout out to Madison Keys, who was in the finals of the Australian Open on the women's side, first final in 7 years. So just wanted to shout that out there. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our NOLA Super Bowl edition of On the Sports Slides. Getting ready for those Kendrick Lamar references. Kids, good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.